Okay, welcome everyone to the first session of the morning. This is a rather intimate crowd, so again, if we have some questions along the way, not a monologue, but questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to go back here. Let's go here. So, a little bit about myself. I've been involved with Web3D standards and Web3D since 2000. I've been doing VR development only since about 2007, AR development since about 2008, so not very long compared to the people that I hang out with, but yeah, been in it for a day or two. I'm very passionate about open standards, and then also enterprise, so my entire career has been enterprise focused. I've never made a game, but I've done a lot of interactive 3D for a variety of different industries. I'm a native Texan living in San Francisco, so Sir Man y'all will slip. If you tweet or do the YouTube, I'm Metaverse1. I would call myself a hobbyist web designer and developer, even though I've been doing it for quite some time. But again, that's all relative to who you hang out with. So I would just say I'm hobbyist. Co-founder of a Seattle-based high-tech residential construction company. So we use CNC fabrication to fabricate timber components. And then I was director of technology. So I would look at a variety of tech, everything from robotics to drones to AR, VR, IoT, it doesn't matter, and see how do we essentially improve what was going on in the factory, or how do we help the people actually on the job site. So no stranger of trying to find the value of technology beyond a wow factor. Currently though, in the daytime, stepped aside, I'm a about what I work on is already in a press release. So please don't ask me any questions about what I'm working on. Outside of that, I also am a co-organizer of various meetup groups and hackathons. So AR Dev Camp was back in 2008, where we tried to essentially bring AR technologies to more developers. Different meetups. So in the Bay Area, I run the WebGL meetup, which is pretty cool because that is where WebVR and a lot of these other technologies came out of. Also, for those that are interested in the building industry, there are hackathons around the architecture, engineering, and construction. And then also virtual reality, hackathon.com was something that we kicked off not too long ago. So as I said, I work on the Samsung Internet team. Those videos didn't play. A little bit about the browser itself. So I don't know if people actually knew that Samsung made an internet browser, but we do. It's the one on the mobile devices, and for the Gear VR headset, has 475 million monthly active users. It is the third most used mobile internet browser. It's optimized for Samsung devices. We also have it for non-Samsung devices. And what I personally like about it is the fact of when you start to get into more enterprise-focused virtual reality and you bring in the real world's legalities and issues, having things like biometrics and other additional layers of security is key. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And then also, as far as something that's kind of nice, if you have the VR browser on the Gear VR, essentially if you're looking at a web page, plug it into the phone, it'll prompt the browser and load it right up. So this is helpful if you're looking at 360 content or just a website that has some additional metadata. So again, we have a lot of devices out there. Other than pieces of cardboard, we're probably the headset that's out there the most. And again, different services integration work across a variety of different platforms. And then also here, this is a docking station running Autodesk's Forge. So in the background here, this is actually a whole 3D model of a factory floor that streams pretty fast. So, a little bit about that, and then moving on. So I already asked this question here, but anyone in the room developers? Okay, so business, I imagine, is where you're coming from. Since we're small enough, we can do this quickly. Already got you, but business-wise, what's your industry?
Oh, I'm in a different category.
Yeah, VR. We have live streaming software in WebGL, and we have for Webview for surgical observation, and we did insurance claims adjustments with Geico.
Cool.
Live streaming.
All right, and then you just tagged along because you were...
I'm a TV host.
Yeah, we have I have another business with him, and we just go down.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yourself?
Early stage investor with a family office here in Houston.
Cool.
I work at Linden Lab. We've met before.
We have met before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I threw water balloons at your office one day. I'm kidding. So just then real quick at a high level, what is the immersive web? So I'm going to talk about this kind of this way. The virtuality continuum, you have all the way from reality to virtual reality and mixed reality. I would say reference this graphic is a better graphic of mixed reality than what you'll hear from Microsoft's marketing department or people who green screen behind a VR experience. So a lot of novel ways to say marketing of mixed reality, but I kind of stay a little bit true to this forum here. So starting off with that is the 3D web. So, just what is a 3D web? Essentially, it's just, as it says here, initially the idea to essentially fully browse and display the internet in 3D. Second Life was a great one that kind of came into that. As far as 3D web content, Google Earth, a variety of different things. But as was stated by the gentleman back there, WebGL, which is a low-level graphics API, essentially kind of made 3D on the web ubiquitous a few years back. So now there's no browser installs, none of that stuff that you have to or download plugins and things for 3D to run natively in the browser. And this site actually is an example of Web 3D. So a little bit of some history here. So Web 3D started off as a thing called VRML, pretty much back in like '94. And so it is nothing new. We're essentially, there was 3 gentlemen, but 2 get main credit for it. Mark Pesce and Tony Parisi essentially created this, which became a standard in '97. Then that became an ISO standard that turned into X3D around, I think it was the 2003 time period. It just kind of defines again the geometry, the markup, everything was all about XML. Especially back then, so that's why that looks that way. And then some popular Web 3D frameworks. So when people say, what are the standards for 3D on the web, or we need standards for 3D on the web, well, they've been there. You just don't want to use them. So, so here are the different frameworks that essentially also allow for Web 3D. You have X3DOM, which is essentially an open source framework that's based on the X3D standard. 3JS, which is ultra popular. And then Babylon.js, and then there's a variety of different ones out there that allow for you to build 3D on the web content. So there aren't any web developers in the house, but if there were, I would just say, please, it's killing me if I see one more photo slide behind another thing. Then jumping into WebVR. So everyone in the room familiar with WebVR? All right, cool. Well, then we're going to all nods, so I'll go through this quickly then. Essentially, it's just being able to access different device information. So you plug it into the browser, the SDKs are built into the browser, they detect the head motions, and then that goes and then changes the view. So you have that you can do with the mouse, the VR headsets. Again, you can use polyfill to do the cardboards, gyroscope, or you can do the touches for the smartphones. If anyone's interested in the spec draft for that, there it is. And then where we are currently right now is WebVR 1.1. So this is the most stable version. It was in limbo for a little bit, not to get too much into it, but if you were to look at the documentation not too long ago, 1.1 was deprecated, and 2.0, which is the next version, is do not implement yet. So people are in this kind of funny spot. But then the different browser vendors, mainly Firefox, Samsung Internet, and a few others said, hey, we'll support 1.1 regardless of what Google says. And so probably what you're going to see is the ability to still build for WebVR 1.1 and then access 2.0 behind certain flags for those that are familiar and care. Just running across the different browsers, you have Mozilla, Chromium. Everyone is familiar with what all these logos are. Okay, well, just in case if not, Mozilla, Chromium, which is like open source, Chrome's built on. The nightly build Firefox, another one that's Firefox, Edge, which actually has pretty great performance. So if you're due to a Windows mixed reality, they have a cool little transition. Chrome on mobile, Samsung Internet. This is the Caramel browser, which is Oculus's browser. And then a lot of people aren't familiar, but that's WeChat, which is actually an application. So that browser in the app, it's kind of neat because there's but that has about a daily usage of 845 million people. It's Chinese, yeah. And so, but anyway, so in the absence of a WebVR implementation, the polyfill kicks in, so you can like use this on, you know, iPhones and others. And then also, as I said, the 2.0 spec is there for developers to start working with, but do not implement. And then here's a list of some of the headsets that support WebVR, or you can do WebVR experiences in them. Here, we'll get to the meat of the stuff. And so WebVR frameworks and tools. So if you do want to build this stuff, you can use a framework called A-Frame, which essentially sits on top of 3JS. And then also, if you're a fan of React, you can do React VR, which is the Facebook one. On the enterprise side, I do say take a look at X3 DOM. Also, Autodesk's Forge platform is pretty good. It leverages 3JS and WebGL, but they do a lot of that heavy lifting. So if you have an enterprise client that wants a 3D renderer, you don't have to go build a 3D renderer, right? I highly recommend you just look at what Autodesk Forge allows for and do that, because they have a 3D version of that for the web, but then also they have a WebVR capabilities. Then when it comes to tools, we're starting to see more of these editors coming out, thank goodness, that allow for very easy kind of manipulation of scenes. So just a couple are Play Canvas, A-Frame has an editor, Visor, WebVR Studio, Sketchfab. People here are familiar with Sketchfab. It's a 3D library. They also have one as well. So that's kind of neat, is that there's more of these tools coming out. And then, not that it's VR, but if you do 360 images, you're starting to see a lot more of the companies like WordPress and others that are supporting basic 360 image and video that you can go into. So opportunities for the web. It's a low barrier for entry. It was pretty cool. I was at an event in New York just last weekend, their NYVR Expo. I was talking to a room full of people who are essentially our developers, VR apps. And I asked for a show of hands. I said, how many people in here like downloading apps or installing apps? And one dude kind of raised his hand. And it was shocking, not only for me, because I wasn't expecting quite that response, but it was shocking for them in the audience, because these are people who are building stuff that you have to download and install. And then they just saw a whole bunch of other room of Kool-Aid drinkers that said, I don't want to do that. So that's interesting. And then I asked how many people don't mind clicking on a link. And of course, hands went up. So it works already on a few billion devices. Pipelines from modeling tools to web are improving. And there are definitely plenty of web developers out there. So for enterprise, this is key. You don't have to run out and grab a bunch of Unity or Unreal people, right? That's overhead for projects that are stuck in proof of concept limbo, when you probably have web devs or someone that maintains that. So that's pretty good. Lots of challenges, but the three main ones, you're sending lots of data over mobile networks. That doesn't mainly, I mean, it does matter for other reasons, but here in the US, where we have unlimited data on a lot of these plans, it doesn't. But when you're dealing with countries where they pay for everything that comes down and they don't have the fastest speeds, that does matter. You do need constant internet connection. That was the issue we ran into at the W3C meeting last night when I was showing off the Odyssey in WebVR. Had a whole lot of people lined up to check out some WebVR content, and conference Wi-Fi was just like, ain't happening. So you do need internet connection. And then, of course, you are doing rendering in the browser or on a mobile device, so you're really making a JavaScript engine work for its money. And so if you want to dive in, kind of, like start to get involved a little bit on the, WebVR, definitely the Slack channel is great. Reddit is another one of those that people post a lot of good resources. The aframe.io school is a fun one. If you have like a few hours and you're not scared of HTML, that's a great place to look at. I've shown Girl Scouts. I mean, they were smart Girl Scouts, but they'd never coded before how to build basic stuff in A-Frame. So Mozilla's done a good job of keeping that pretty simple. Create WebVR has some different stuff out there as well, as does WebVR.rocks. So some nice resources for someone to jump into. And then kind of looking at what's next. So of course, there's WebAR. which is using WebRTC and a variety of other things depending, and I'm sure some people have seen, someone even mentioned the AR Core and AR Kit demos that are out, and the AR Core Web example is pretty neat. So it's kind of cool to be able to see AR coming through a web browser, even though that's, well, yeah, it's still AR. You're putting things in the real world. Internet of Things, of course, is another one. So if you go to that address, you're going to see essentially a tower bridge, which then when you mouse over those little coins, it's actually hitting 5 different sensors that are on this Lego bridge. So these sensors here are talking to an IoT cloud platform. That information is going to a Mongo database, which then the scene is querying, getting JSON back to show those values in the A-frame scene there. So why does this matter? When you're dealing with a facility like this, you have hundreds, if not thousands, or hundreds of thousands of sensors over a campus. You need to see this information in context. If you think this does not matter, talk to people who run data centers. If they have a temperature sensor that says it's hot and it's on the floor, that means a whole lot different than if it's hot and on the ceiling, right? So, so seeing things in context. So this is neat to where when you have the physical web and Internet of Things meets WebVR, or just immersive web tech. Artificial intelligence also is another one that we're starting to see, not just in web-based stuff as well. You know, Watson has their whole VR lab, Samsung has Bixby, and there are a variety of other people that are working on this as well. Secure applications, which is what is going to happen as VR wants to be grown up. Just going to call it like it is, because right now this isn't a big. This doesn't really happen, right? How many medical apps do you see out there nail HIPAA compliance, right? How many of these other applications where people are looking at architectural walkthroughs or whatever is being done is actually has the security features there that those people are supposed to be the people that they say they are, right? So when contracts and people start getting sued, you want to make sure that you have all the documentation and security that's in place of normal applications. Payments as well. I think mobile gaming has made it difficult for VR developers because most people are used to not paying for experiences, right? They don't want to pay for experiences. So getting them in world, doing those purchasing and things like that. So of course you can use it for retail and all the additional things that you can use payments for. But I think that also this is going to be one of those key things for the way that people monetize on more of the social element. And then of course all kinds of other cool things. So so just looking then at enterprise and immersive tech, because even though there aren't a lot of slides on this, this is an area where we could go down a much bigger rabbit hole. So things to consider when dealing with enterprise. Growing number of industries use 3D, like really, it's made by almost every industry except for those that do, you know, print and two-dimensional images. But the thing is that they have their own 3D data and they have their own data formats and standards, and most people do not do that, right? Most of the shops and services companies that I see, they're Unity dev shops that want to be game engine users that make games that can't pay the bills making games, so then they go out and use those skills to farm off and say, give me an FBX, give me an OBJ, give me a Collada, but they're not being considerate to what is the data standard that you're getting. If you're in the medical industry, you have no idea what the hell that is. You have a DICOM file. You have a volumetric rendering. You have a LiDAR scan. Do something with this, right? So I would say that for those that are looking at enterprise, you know, meet them halfway, right? More than that if you really want the business. Really look at, you know, how you work with their data flow. I really think that, you know, this right here, need to collaborate with others across a variety of devices. This is key. That's why I made this about immersive web and not necessarily VR or AR, because this screen is immersive. And if you think that looking at a monitor is not immersive, talk to people who are in Linden Labs and Second Life, and they will have, they helped me become a believer of how a screen is immersive, even one that's not this big. But that's something to remember, right? Various different stakeholders. And then that kind of leads to these other things here that you can read, is that, you know, I feel that VR and AR make better features than apps for enterprise. Because if we have to collaborate on information, right, that's coming across on the mobile phone. And then that's not going to be something that I have to put a brick or go run around and look for a VR. And then same thing with like AR. It depends on the context of the task being performed. If I'm collaborating with you and I'm out in the field and you're back in the office, AR does nothing for you, but it's everything for me, right? And so those systems, so I think that when people go to look at an enterprise solution, not a one-off widget, but something that's scalable, look at a platform that provides these different features that are going to nail what is the context of the task being performed, what is the comfort level, right? Because that's the other thing. Most stakeholders in enterprise have way more gray in their hair than most gamers do. Those people do not want to feel stupid. They do not want to learn how to use a 15-button controller or others. They want to get in there, do what they need to do, and then bounce out. And most of them feel comfortable with an iPad. So when you're wowing the client in VR, that person who's making the I'm signing the check decision, you need to make sure that, again, that the experience that you're providing and the value that you're adding hits all of those different criteria for those stakeholders. Yes, sir.
Also, I noticed that at least for us, when we're doing our testing and trying to get like betas and to get more data, is that when we're stereoscopic 3D, a VR application, a business and application, but we've noticed that to get in, it's almost easier if you start with just with the 2D, they don't even get to like, and then kind of show them the benefits of the 3D after you've already got them to take some type of an adoption in a 2D sense, and that's something that they get like with their phone using the app in order to like video it, and then you transmitting the data using that, and then now you feel like, well, now you can do it in 3D, you're able to see frame damage or whatever type of thing, but after the fact, like you get them to sign on with what they understand, and then you kind of slowly get past the learning curve to the benefits of the VR stuff.
Don't throw somebody who's never swam in the deep end first.
Exactly.
You know, so.
Start them in the cave pool.
Exactly. So, so some examples of WebVR and enterprise, and this is where it's kind of light because again, this just became a stable specification not too long ago. But some interesting places where we're seeing it is in architecture and construction. There's a company called BIM Object. Essentially, they're a 3D library. Think of them like Sketchfab, but of real-world products. So from the building product manufacturers themselves, of course, corporate training. A company called Aquinas Training out of the East Coast. These guys are based in Sweden, East Coast, and then West Coast. Boone VR essentially does medical training that's for surgeons and others, and 360 video. So some of the examples of where we're starting to see it right now. Surprisingly enough, at that same conference I was at in New York, there were probably about 7 companies that were expoing that were running WebVR, which was actually pretty cool. Most of it was just like video, images, things like that, but still, it was nice to see that. So I recommend people go to industry-specific conferences. If you're building something for enterprise, do not go to SVVR. Do not come to this event, right? Go buy a booth and spend your money where your clients are and your customers are, not where your fellow nerds are. So that's where I say industry-specific conferences. And what's great about this is that the more that these people at these conferences see someone there with a VR rig, is the more they feel comfortable with this. Oh, this is a part of where we're going now as an industry, and they will actually embrace it because they know their competitors will, right? So I cannot emphasize enough that we need to do more of this outreach. So this was an example of where we were at the AIA, which is an architecture thing. It was actually kind of cool because we captured Michelle Obama in 360 video streaming, so that was kind of fun. And then just other different events, Internet of Things World. So again, these are just some of the events that Samsung has participated in. But again, we're a little bit more focused on the enterprise side when I'm out and about. Also industry-specific hackathons. So definitely, as I said earlier, because of the ones that I've been involved in the building industry, that's a no-brainer. Same thing with just different Internet of Things, sports, and more. So this is Mayor Adler from Austin, who was a really big fan of smart cities and others. They're pushing virtual reality pretty hard up there. And for a hackathon, they actually let us hack in City Hall, which was pretty cool. Also, then you have people like Congressman Himes down here, who came and spoke at some smart cities focused hackathons up in Connecticut, and he's on the security council panel, and some very interesting things there around geolocated information. Something that I think that people are going to have to remember. It's a little side tangent, but with a lot of these tracking systems, right? There are going to be people who don't want you putting Pokemon in their backyard, right? So one, you're going to have people like Mark Pesce, actually, who I mentioned earlier, or even looking at working groups where they define how do you create essentially a dead zone. Because if I'm the owner of this property, I want to be able to say, no, I don't want any of your content here, right? Or I do want your content here. That's one. The other thing to consider is that a lot of these headsets that do tracking, right? Google, Microsoft, like with their Tango devices, and then Microsoft. If I'm playing a game and running around, I'm running around and scanning the inside of a facility. If I'm this guy's son, I'm scanning the inside of a government facility. It's not being stored on a secure server. That's being owned by Google, and so now Google has a scan. You see where I'm going with this, right? So there's a lot of things to where as we go into more enterprise, as these technologies mature, there's going to be a whole lot of just like Victor Frankenstein where the monster's out. So this is just kind of the reality for immersive technologies in enterprise. The pros is money's being made. It really is. There are definitely much bigger markets. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but when people say why enterprise, it's because it's like gaming is supposed to be something like just 180 billion in the next like 3 years, but pick any one of these industries that I've shown and they're like just in the US around like $1 trillion. Once you're in, you are in, right? I mean, I don't need to say anything. If anyone's ever worked in a company's IT department, there are still folks running XP. And yet they will have divisions of their company that say like, we are innovative, and they have these really cool marketing videos where they're like touching stuff that doesn't exist. And then, when you like try to send them something or like Skype with them, they're like, oh, we're on XP, so slow down. Some of the cons though is it is harder pipelines and workflows. Like I said earlier, you really have to understand and focus on an industry, learn them, love them, because it is a longer adoption cycle. And then also, as I said earlier, there's cultural barriers, right? We're in this funny stage, and I've witnessed this because I've talked to different people using these technologies for, like I said, quite some time. And I've seen this shift of where you have people sit there, arms crossed, don't know why they need to implement this stuff. And that's fine. That's fine. But you can sit down and look at how do you solve a Monday through Friday problem? How does being able to interact with data in this new way do it? And then if you still don't want to do it, then that's a you problem. That's not a technology problem anymore. And so the technology is kind of getting there, depending upon what's your use case and what you want to use it for. And then the other thing that people have to remember is like big firms will go to the usual suspects. I'm sorry, if you're a Unity shop or even just a web developer and you build a cool web thing and you go to BMW, they're going to Accenture, they're going to Deloitte. They will not work with you. Let's be honest, right? You have to start with the smaller people and then go up from there. Build enough of a client base to where you're doing things good for people, because everybody tries to go after those top 5 people, and it's just like, no. They're never gonna come and talk to you because those other people that they've been doing this stuff with for years know them better than they know themselves as a customer. So do not fool yourself and think that you are going to go and be on Boeing's long-term strategy. You might find a person who will do a proof of concept in one of these companies. But if you are to compete with the usual suspects, offer something unique beyond just being a dev shop. But other than that, it isn't easy, but don't give up. And I guess there's enough in the room that actually know what that reference is. Yeah. Awesome. So in that, I kind of ask, now that you know, one, if you are looking at standards, or if you're a person that says that there need to be standards, how are you embracing those existing standards and making them better? Because they're not the best technology, but they are standards that are out there. Again, will you work with your clients' data flows? Or again, do they have to jump through hoops to get into your experience? And that's never cool. That's like me saying, hey, come to my party, but I need you to dress a certain way, act a certain way, and do certain stuff for the privilege of coming to my party. You're probably not going to come. Also, do have someone on your board that is boots on the ground, like mud in the trenches kind of experience. Professors are great, but you really want someone that's a good part of applied innovation as well as theoretical. So it's always good to have that good balance of folks that can tell you exactly how you can get to market by solving a real problem. And then how will you be better tomorrow than today in providing more holistic solutions, right? Because I really do think that, again, try it, play it out with different people. When you say, I want to build for you a VR-only app, or I want to build for you an app where you can interface with your data in a lot of different ways that has a VR feature, right? Just see how well that resonates. And on that, we're done kind of in record time. So, thank you. So, any questions?